Hi, this is Anthony. Welcome back to the show. As always, besides my request that you hit the subscribe button, please do take a second and hit the like button, and hopefully you'll take some time and leave a comment, even a short one, after you've watched this video. This is about the 20th video that I've done just on answering questions and comments concerning the D.B. Cooper case. In the past, I produced a lot of D.B. Cooper content, but I've slowed down primarily because I've run out of things that I want to say about the case. I think that there's a lot of other people out there with a lot of good information on the case, and so be sure to check them out and listen to what they have to say. But as I try to point out, look at it through a skeptical lens. Ask yourself, what is the source of the information? And how good of a source is it? Even well-intentioned sources can make mistakes. Is the source someone who was actually on the plane during the skyjacking? Is the source FBI files that have been released? Is the source a deceased author who claims that Cooper survived and that his girlfriend provided information about the case for the author to write a book? These and any other sources can pose some problems, sometimes serious ones, but they can also contain a kernel of truth. And on the topic of other YouTube channels as sources of information for this subject, as always, I want to give a shout out to Drew Beeson and Ned DeHan of Black Box Online Radio. I don't know either of these two gentlemen personally, but I do correspond with them to a small degree in the comment section of their live shows, and I appreciate the dialogue that they provide for my comments, as well as the shout outs that they give me encouraging their viewers to look at my channel. If you haven't already found these two gentlemen, then be sure to check out their channels, and if you do subscribe, leave a comment in their videos and let them know that you found them through me. Let's jump right into comments. These are in no particular order, although a lot of them are starting with the most recent ones that I've received. Here's one about the clip-on tie that was found left on the plane and is believed to have been Cooper's. As far as this question's concerned, this particular tie was sold for a few years at JCPenney's, but they look like every other black clip-on tie worn by every man who worked in an office in the United States in the mid to late 1960s. So no one's memory is going to be jogged by thinking about that particular tie. I think, of course, if this case is broken, it may be because of DNA or other substances on the tie. Anyway, thank you very much for taking the time to comment. Okay, here's another comment, and I've covered up the commenter's name. If there's any chance of a viewer being embarrassed by their comment, I want to hide their identity. My purpose isn't to bring up people's comments for any other reason than trying to analyze them or answer them as far as what they're saying. Of this commenter, they say, I must admit that I expected more compelling arguments. I wanted you to prove that McCoy can't be DB, but you didn't. I came away thinking that you're another person trying to sell clicks. You are entitled to your opinion on his appearance as well as how much you believe FBI statements, but there was no persuasive evidence here that knocked McCoy as being the DB, where there is a lot of persuasive evidence saying he is. Now, I have to admit that since I posted the video that you referenced a year ago, I haven't rewatched it, so I'm not exactly sure of what pieces of information I happened to look at in that video and what the arguments that I used there against McCoy being Cooper. As far as the comments, first of all, sorry that you were disappointed in me being unable to convince you, and I'm sorry that you thought that I was another person trying to sell clicks. If I was only trying to create videos that got me more subscribers or likes or whatever, then I could do a wide range of other topics that are far more popular and easier to do. As you can see from my channel, I've done over 300 videos over the past 3 years or so. Some of those videos are shorts that are based on regularly uploaded videos, but roughly I've done 300 original ones. Even the short ones can take an hour or more to do, and longer ones can take a couple days, even with my limited and basic editing skills. And my channel's not yet monetized, so I've devoted a tremendous amount of time trying to create videos that at the very least educate people to some degree and hopefully spark some thought and perhaps conversation. And that's what I've done with this video in particular, which actually has been quite a popular one. And I must say that there are many people who are partisans of the McCoy being D.B. Cooper camp. As I always mention, I was one of those people for a short time period. I saw the first video that Dan Greider had done, and the way that he presented the information, it convinced me. And I made a video stating as much, but a kind viewer pointed out some of the issues, and I watched the next video that Dan Greider had done, and looking at it with a more critical eye, I see the way that he tries to manipulate information, and perhaps someday I'll do a whole video just on analyzing his videos. But for now, I'll just say that I don't think that there is any credible, hard evidence or even moderately strong circumstantial evidence tying the two incidents together. The book The Real McCoy was written by a probation officer with research by a former FBI agent. As far as I've seen, he literally is the only FBI agent that thinks that Cooper was McCoy. When you watch Dan Greider's video, you see the interview with Agent O'Hara, the man who shot McCoy, poo-pooing that he told the authors of The Real McCoy that he thought McCoy was Cooper. In the book, the authors evidently state that there was a gas station receipts and phone receipts indicating that McCoy drove up from Las Vegas to Salt Lake City on Thanksgiving Day. I've seen someplace on the internet that put McCoy in his house at 10 a.m. So if those are true, and right at this moment I don't have links or citations to share with you, but people can research it on their own. But if this is true, then we have him jumping out of a plane somewhere over southwestern Washington or perhaps even northern Oregon on the night of Thanksgiving just after 8 p.m. And he makes it to the ground. He survives the jump in less than ideal weather, and then somehow, without cell phones or anything like that, is able to rendezvous with somebody, presumably his wife. And then they drive down to Las Vegas overnight and then drive back up north to Salt Lake City. All of this happening within the span of approximately 14 hours. And at this point, could I prove in a court of law evidence to lay out as an alibi or scenario? No, I can't. But this is what the partisans of the McCoy is Cooper theory wants you to believe. So, is that likely or even technically possible to cover that much ground in that short a time? I doubt it. People point out the similarities in the true crimes. Really, the only similarities were the location of where the fuel truck was, which makes perfect sense because you want it as far away from the plane as possible, so you're going to have it in one of two spots. And then the type of plane that was hijacked, it's the same. Everything else in it was different in the known McCoy skyjacking compared to Cooper skyjacking. The demeanor of the two people, absolutely different. Their behavior, different. Some people argue that the notes were typed up in the same way on the same type of paper. If this is true, show actual evidence of this. This is just one of those things that you can make up and nobody can argue with since we don't have the notes. I need to see contemporary reports by eyewitnesses that this is the case for me to believe that. And lastly, some people who saw Dan Greider's second video, where he supposedly found the Cooper parachute in the barn that belonged to Richard Floyd McCoy Jr.'s mother back east, that certainly would be the holy grail of the case if it were true. It's not true, as many people pointed out, that it's the same type of parachute with the same type of equipment. And even if it looked like it was to an expert, how would a parachute used over the Pacific Northwest, and one which shouldn't have any reason to be kept by the hijacker, somehow mysteriously get to North Carolina or wherever it was found? That just doesn't make any logical sense. And since that video was uploaded, I haven't seen any other information on the internet where Dan Greider is pushing that narrative. So I think that he realized that's not the Cooper parachute. And how does the approximately 3 packets of money end up in the Columbia or in the Santa Tina bar in the McCoy scenario? I don't see that either. And lastly, there's a lot of people in the United States who do not believe that O.J. Simpson killed his ex-wife and Ron Goldman. If O.J. Simpson wrote a book entitled If I Killed Her, people would still not believe it. So I think that there are some people who are just not going to be open-minded enough to see the flaws in the McCoy is Cooper argument, and that's okay. Okay, let's look at the next comment. Here's a comment from Big Woody, who provides a lot of commentary on my videos, and I do appreciate it. Even if Big Woody and I do not always see eye to eye on some topics or conclusions, I still do appreciate people's feedback. I'll let it stay up for a few minutes in case anybody wants to follow some of the leads that might be presented here. But while on this, I'm reminded of something that occasionally comes up from time to time. And that's the question of how do we square researchers' beliefs about the D.B. Cooper case, which may seem well researched and well balanced, with other writings that they publicly have posted, generally on their websites, where they discuss using psychic intuition in their research, or they discuss numerous alien encounters that they've had, things which otherwise would call into question their credibility or perhaps sanity, when their D.B. Cooper theories seem to be fairly well grounded, even if they're not widely accepted postulations. And there's more than one person that I have in mind when it comes to this phenomenon. I guess the conclusion that one might get from this is it wouldn't hurt to look at researchers' other writings to get a feel for their overall quality of their scholarship. And if you see them making a lot of goofy assumptions or conclusions about other topics, then maybe you should be even more cautious in their conclusions about the Cooper case. Now, here's a comment about DNA that could be found on the tie. I think that I'd mentioned in the video being referenced that it could be the DNA on the tie eventually cracks the case. Now, assuming that the tie is really the one that was worn by the person now known as D.B. Cooper, which I think it was, but that's not 100% sure. But if it was, I have no doubt that his DNA is on the tie. But I've also mentioned that probably the DNA of everybody that he's ever talked to at work while he wore the tie is probably on it just from little bits of spittle that leaves a person's mouth when they're talking. And probably there's a lot of DNA from various FBI agents and other people, including perhaps Tina Mucklow, who have handled the tie over the years. During a period of time when nobody ever thought that little bits of DNA could yield answers to mysteries. So, if DNA could be lifted from the tie, we're talking about perhaps dozens and dozens of different individuals who contributed to depositing DNA on the tie. Each of those unique samples would need to be compared to online databases, and then people start being excluded as potential suspects. And then any others that remain can point you in the direction of where to do more research. For instance, you probably don't have Ralph Himmelsbach's DNA, but you might find somebody who is a close match that lives in New Jersey with the same last name, and you determine that it's his gray niece or something like that. Okay, you know that it's Ralph's, you can exclude that. And we've seen with a number of cases recently where DNA is starting to solve crimes from many years ago, thanks to advances in DNA testing, as well as people posting their own results on online genealogical sites. And here's another comment in the same vein dealing with DNA in another famous case that's recently been solved. Another thing, Anthony, just a friendly heads up, stop with the Summerton Man, okay? Folks get the point. The fact is they had his body, not so with Cooper, so please put the narrative to bed. Otherwise, a very good effort. So, I appreciate that some people who are diligent in watching perhaps every one of my D.B. Cooper videos has seen me talk about certain things on more than one occasion. Obviously, one reason to do this is not everyone is watching every one of my videos, and so you want to catch people who haven't seen your other stuff and present it to them at a point when you think it's important. The case that I use is called the Summerton Man case from Australia. The thumbnail description of the case is that in the late 1940s, a man is found dead on the beach in southern Australia, evidently the victim of poisoning. He has no ID, but later on possessions of his were found, and then a scrap of paper found in his pocket links him to a book with what seems to be a mysterious code, which may also be connected to a nurse who lived within a few hundred meters of where the body was found. A nurse who her own daughter speculated might have been a Soviet spy. And for about 70 years, all kinds of researchers have used these facts and clues to come up with a theory on what they think might have happened. But of course, luckily, they had the body, and before they even had to dig up the body to do DNA testing, they found that a plaster cast of the man's head and torso contained a few hairs that contained DNA, which were able to be tested, and now it's pretty much concluded that the man in question was simply a lonely divorced man, possibly looking to reconnect with his wife, and not being able to do so, and not having any kids or family members left, nor much reason to live, probably took his own life while he was smoking a cigarette and watching the waves crash into the sand on the beach. Not a Soviet spy assassinated because he knew too much, and the other mysterious clues seem to have been or had more mundane explanations. I use this case because while there are very few, if any, clues in the D.B. Cooper case where there's very little doubt about, in fact, most of them there's a lot of doubt about. And when we try to construct a profile of who Cooper was or what his motivations were, we're going on suppositions that are based on facts that may not hold up in a court of law at this point. Whether Cooper had dark skin or could perhaps have had Mexican or Italian or Native American ancestry. Or did he just appear to have dark skin because the lights were turned down low? He evidently smoked 8 cigarettes, and unfortunately it seems that those cigarette butts eventually were thrown out by the FBI because they didn't think that they would have any value, which of course with DNA testing now, they could probably solve the case in about 2 days. Cooper also drank 1 or perhaps 2 bourbons and sodas. People argue about a conscientious Mormon Sunday school teacher like Richard Floyd McCoy would not be chain smoking or drinking alcohol on the Cooper flight, although other people have stated that prior to becoming a Mormon, McCoy did smoke. Where people argue that Cooper was, in fact, simply pretending to smoke and not really inhaling, that seems to me to be an exercise in futility that has no point. Why pretend to be a chain smoker when you don't need to? When you need to be focusing on other things? Some people argue that the actions of Cooper and which parachutes he chose proves that he was a skilled jumper, and others argue the complete opposite is true, that he didn't really know what he was doing. It's easy to overlook that he in fact was simply a criminal and ascribe to him as being a badass outlaw that stuck it to the man and got away with it. Maybe he was. Maybe he was a Ted Braden or even a Robert Rackstraw. Or maybe he was none of those and screwed up and ended up in the Columbia. But I think that if DNA is able to crack the case, there's a good possibility that whether he survived or not, Cooper was probably not the person who a lot of researchers profiled him to be. That's my only point in occasionally bringing up the Summerton Man case. Plus, if you like true crime, it's just an interesting case, and I encourage people to look for other resources on it. There's a lot of good videos on YouTube about the case. Here's a comment from Big Cat, who provides a lot of information in responses to my videos. It's discussing some people's belief that Cooper exhibited nicotine stains on his fingers, which may actually have been dye stains from him using his fingers or hands to cover his face with dye to make his skin appear to be darker than it naturally is. That's another one of those potential clues that we really don't know what it was that was seen, and even if we did, does it really help us in solving the case much? But again, thank you very much, Big Cat, for this one. This next comment is in reference to a series of videos that I did about Vince Peterson. Vince Peterson is the suspect that Eric Ulis is identified as being the most likely candidate to be Cooper based on 3 titanium alloy particles found on the tie, which Eric says comes from a facility at a company called Remcrew in Pennsylvania. I've looked at online evidence concerning this particular alloy, and it was developed a number of years prior at another facility, I believe in Ohio. And there does seem to be research done by other researchers in other parts of the world around this time that, to me, make it clear that this was not a substance that only 8 or so men would come into contact with at REM Crew. I think that the research that Eric is doing on this is worthwhile and may lead to a viable suspect, but it doesn't seem like anything in Vince Peterson's background or circumstances that would indicate that he would come to the Pacific Northwest to commit a skyjacking and then survive and then get back to Pennsylvania and continue on with his life. And I was also contacted by another viewer who, along with some other people, have been doing research and have located another suspect named Milton Vordahl, who on the face of it looks like an excellent candidate as far as background and occupation and even looks, although I believe he was 58 at the time, which a lot of people think is too old for being Cooper. And by the way, those who believe that Richard Floyd McCoy was Cooper, and Cooper was thought to have been in his mid-40s, McCoy was 29 at the time of the Cooper skyjacking. In this comment, Chris F. says this is him without a doubt. Again, it's in reference to my video arguing that Richard Floyd McCoy was not Cooper, so it looks like Chris F. and I disagree here, but respectfully. Here, Michael says it's no fun if he died, he being Cooper. As I mentioned, I think that there's a good chance that Cooper simply ended up in the Columbia, which would explain to a degree how some of the money got buried in the sand at Tina Bar. I don't rule out the possibility that he might have survived, with or without the money, but I think that under those conditions it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that he perished. And in this comment, which is referencing Richard Floyd McCoy, Tony says that even his daughter and son say his alibi was bogus. The thing about family members and their recollections and motivations, we need to always be careful with. The memories of people, especially small children, can often be quite different than what actually took place. I have certain memories from when I was young, and then when I see pictures that were taken at that time, what I remember and what actually physically was there are sometimes not completely in alignment. Unfortunately, I had very little childhood trauma, but when there is trauma or even just a lot of drama, that can serve to distort memories even more. As far as McCoy's kids are concerned, to answer this question, I've done some research and I couldn't find exactly the age of the kids at the time. In the past, I may have had a clearer understanding of the kids' ages, and that may be in some of the videos that I've done, but they were very young. Let us say that his son was maybe 4 years old when his father died, and that was a couple years after he'd been sent to prison for skyjacking that he was convicted of. How does his son have any more or less accuracy or certitude on his father's guilt or innocence concerning the Cooper case than any other researcher looking into the case? It does seem like the son is going on YouTube shows arguing that his father was D.B. Cooper now. In the past, what I've seen on news sites is that the family denied it. Certainly, if all the evidence was there, which I argue that there was no evidence, but if it was such a cut and dried case, then why didn't the feds prosecute McCoy for the Cooper skyjacking in addition to the one that he received 45 years for? And I forgot to mention when I talked about this topic earlier, my understanding from another video was that the 10 people on the plane or at the airport who had seen D.B. Cooper were shown McCoy's picture, and they all denied that McCoy was Cooper. On a website this evening, I saw where it stated that the 3 air hostesses were shown the picture of McCoy, and they denied that it was Cooper. Again, I don't have citations to show you, but if you're interested, you can do your own research, and maybe you'll find out if what I laid out here is accurate. And I know that some people will say that eyewitness testimony is not always accurate. I completely agree with that. But eyewitness testimony is better than nothing at all in many cases. I guess you have to ask yourself, what is a stronger piece of evidence in this case? 3 to 10 people who saw D.B. Cooper being shown a photograph of Richard Floyd McCoy by the FBI and them all saying that the two people were not the same, or a family member who might have been a couple years old at the time of the skyjackings, who may have changed their story on whether their father was or wasn't D.B. Cooper, and who may have financial or other interests in pushing one or another narrative at this point that differs from what may have been said in the past. Again, as I point out in this case, I don't have a favorite candidate that I think is a strong enough one to say that without a doubt, yes, that person was Cooper. And I'm not here just to shoot down everybody else's thoughts. If I don't take issue with something another researcher has said, it's probably because I think that what they've said has some potential validity. But when I see flaws in logic or weak links in the chain, or completely missing links in the chain of evidence or in the chain of logic that is taking us from clues to a conclusion, then I'm going to point that out. And that irritates some people, and other people appreciate me taking the time to discuss these things and make these videos that, at this time at least, take a lot of time to create and return no revenue. Okay, to wrap up today, I just wanted to mention CooperCon is coming up next month. I doubt that I'll go, even though it's only about 15 miles away. I don't think at this point the expense of it is worth it for me, but if you have any interest, check it out on their website, and I wish them all the luck in the world. It'll be interesting to hear if they have any new concrete evidence that's presented on the case. As always, if you've made it this far, I really do appreciate you viewing my material. Again, while I want to get my channel monetized, there are far easier ways of making money than creating these videos on DB Cooper and other topics. I'm doing it to try to educate people while I learn more about the topics myself. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, and it just takes a second. And if you like this video, hit the like button and check out my other videos, and do leave a comment or question. It may take a while, but I always get around to reading them, and I try to respond to everyone either personally or by incorporating them into a video such as this. Thanks again.